Forum, co-hosted by The Appeal and Now This. I'm Jay Willis, your host for today, senior contributor at The Appeal. And I'm really excited to welcome our guest to this forum. There are two candidates running for Wayne County Prosecutor, but only one was able to join us today, and that is Victoria Burton Harris. She began her career at McCaskey Law Office, which specializes in criminal and family law. She also acts as a legal advisor for local grassroots organizations, including, among others, We the People Detroit. She began her legal career, I'm sorry, I misspoke, at the law firm of William W. Swore and Associates, where she practiced criminal law in state and federal court. Not with us today, she did not accept our invitation to this forum, is Kim Worthy, Wayne County's incumbent prosecutor. She began her career there in 1984 in the office. From 1994 to 2004, she served as a Wayne County Circuit Court Criminal Division judge. And then in 2004, she was appointed to replace former Wayne County prosecutor and current Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan. Now, because we only have one of the candidates here today, I do want to make clear that both candidates were invited again, and this forum indicates neither support nor opposition to either candidate or their respective positions. With that said, Victoria, welcome, and thank you again for joining us today. Let's talk about the several crises in America that are colliding right now. The killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and Breonna Taylor, among tragically many others. The violent police response that we're seeing to peaceful protests of that violence, and the grave threat that COVID-19 poses, particularly to vulnerable communities and communities of color. These intertwined crises are exposing profound inadequacies in the way our legal system works, and also real differences of opinion on how to truly pursue justice and equity. So Victoria, I want to ask first about these protests that we're seeing across the country. They're coming at a really unique moment. Cities and states are slashing their budgets for services across the board. Everything from healthcare, education, even things like waste collection, during the middle of this historically devastating pandemic. Yet at the same time, police budgets are remaining essentially untouched, and in many cases, they're actually growing. So as this conversation about defunding the police takes place in different cities across the country, what's your position on this idea of realigning public safety budgets by shifting resources away from what we might call traditional law enforcement and investing in alternative public safety programs instead?
Jay, in the city of Detroit's 2019 budget, you will find that we spent about $300 million on law enforcement, and we spent the least amount of our budget on health. So what that means is that during a pandemic, when a city like Detroit, the Blackest city in America, was hit very hard, both with positive cases of COVID-19 and a lot of COVID-19 deaths, we needed to re-examine how we were spending our dollars. And this conversation, thankfully, is continuing. Instead of spending $300 million on law enforcement, why not take a step back and say, let's try $200 million, maybe $150 million, and reroute some of those dollars to education, social services, mental health, substance abuse resources. You know, when you talk about law enforcement, that does not mean that you're having a conversation about public safety. Folks need to understand that law enforcement and public safety are not the same things. You need to understand that when we say divesting from jails and prisons and investing in solutions and in communities, in our children, in resources, then that means that we are working to create and build a safer and a more just and equitable community. And that's what this conversation is about. It's not about scaring people and taking away the police. You know, there are a lot of folks on the ground who are advocating to abolish the police, but that is not what the term defund means. Defund means to decrease. It does not mean to take it down to zero. And, you know, when people get bothered by that term, I tell folks, well, why don't you look at education? Education was important people to really think critically about is to not let the word be so jarring, because I'm not a fan of the word. It takes too much to explain to folks. I would much rather have a very robust conversation about reimagining public safety, about how county jails and prisons are not working to eliminate crime, and that the research has taught us that we respond better to crime when we're not simply responding, when we are focusing on intervention and prevention. And the only way that you do that is by investing in people, in communities, in education, in children, in social services, in mental health services, right? Like, let's invest more of our funding into first responders who are trained to de escalate situations.
Beg pardon, unmute. One of the most powerful forces that we see in cities across the country are police unions. They work hand in glove with prosecutors and frequently prevent officer accountability and foster secrecy around policing. And there's this common understanding that it's the prosecutorial reliance and relationship with police officers and police unions that can deter prosecutors from challenging the culture of police departments. So we have seen calls across the country to disentangle this close relationship, as well as calls for elected prosecutors to even reject financial contributions from police unions. What's your position on police union campaign contributions?
I don't believe that a prosecutor should be receiving campaign contributions from police unions who they will be later asked to hold accountable, who they say they'll be holding accountable, but yet you're taking their money. So aren't they engaged in a pay-to-play system with you when they support your reelection and keep you in office? And I also don't think prosecutors should be taking campaign dollars from people that work within their office. It gives off the impression that they have to pay to keep their jobs. Again, this pay-to-play system. And thankfully, campaign finance reports are public. So you can go and you can see elected prosecutors' campaign finance report that they filed them, and you can determine for yourself what the truth is. You can see who is supporting these campaigns, who is contributing to these folks staying in office and keeping the power that they have. And then ask yourself, what are they doing with that power? Is it serving the people, or is it self-serving power? And you decide. I'm very proud to say that I have 4,660 donors as of last night across the country, at least one in every state. And not $1 has come from a police union. Not $1 has come from someone who works in my office that I employ. And so, our campaign contribution report, it's going to be so much of a headache for my finance director, because of the many small dollar contributions across the country that reflect the people, what people want, that people want change. And I'm very proud of that.
So I want to turn next to another story that's gotten national attention recently, and that's the police use of no-knock warrants. So in March, you had police in Louisville, Kentucky, execute a no-knock warrant at the apartment of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. They fired at least 8 shots, they fired shots and hit Breonna at least 8 times, killing her. Police found nothing illegal in her home, and the person they were searching for was already in custody. And Detroit actually experienced a similar one of these tragedies in 2010, when 7-year-old Ayanna Jones was shot and killed when Detroit police executed a no-knock raid on her family's home. Charges were subsequently fired against the officer who shot her, but they were dismissed by the DA's office following a pair of mistrials. I'm wondering, what's your position on creating a policy that would bar prosecutors from supporting law enforcement requests for no-knock warrants? And would you publicly support a ban on no-knock warrants altogether?
As a defense attorney who has been on the front lines for our young people, specifically folks in BYP 100 here in Detroit, Black Lives Matter Detroit chapter, folks who have marched, folks who have chained themselves to the very police precinct that Ayanna Stanley Jones's killer worked in at the time of her murder. And I represented them all the way to trial when those charges were dismissed. I am very intimately connected with that story and the people on the ground who fought to bring a voice to her story, to her grandmother's pain. And I can tell you that that experience will never leave me. So you will never see me authorize nor support no-knock warrants. In fact, it is my belief that, again, as a criminal defense attorney, that the warrant division in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office is it's uncontrolled. You'll hear our current prosecutor proudly say we don't rubber stamp warrants, but that's impossible and that can't be true if we have so many cases that we're apologizing for, that we are overturning for wrongful convictions because we prosecuted an innocent person and we got it wrong. So instead of working so much on the back end, focus on the front end. Focus on making sure that you investigate first before you charge. We currently have a culture of charge first, investigate later, if at all, and that has to stop. We need to make sure that we have policies in place and that the policies are being followed on the ground by line prosecutors that are in that division so that they're not just rubber stamping warrants. They're not just blanket, signing everything that comes to the door, or it depends on who's there. Something gets signed depending on the mood or the person. No, there needs to be a policy and a streamlined process. Check a set of boxes off. Did you review body cam footage? We know that we cannot rely solely on police reports anymore. We know that because there is a growing list of officers who have made untruthful reports and who have testified untruthfully in court. So, to authorize these kinds of warrants and it results in the death of folks, and in this county, if it results in the death of an innocent Black child, and you as a Black prosecutor aren't standing up, speaking out loudly about it, and doing all that you can to ensure that it doesn't happen again, that's a problem, Jay.
So I want to actually ask about an issue that you just touched on there, the use of Brady lists, internal lists of police officers that prosecutors decide are not trustworthy to testify in criminal matters. My understanding is that the current prosecutor's office maintains one, but it isn't yet public. And Kim Worthy has said she will consider making it public once the ongoing probe is complete. My question is, if elected, would you pledge to make this Brady list public?
Yes, there doesn't need to be more work. Again, this is lip service that folks receive and they just take it for what it is. What more do you need to do before you have the names? Why do you need to grow the list to make it public and publish it? What I don't care if there are 5 names on it and you're hoping to get 20. Publish 5 that you have right now. Why do we need to wait and allow these untruthful officers to continue the police misconduct and contribute to bringing innocent people into this system, and oftentimes leading to the death of innocent people, innocent Black people? Why are we going to wait until it grows or we can do something more with it? If you have a list of names, publish it now for what it is and then continue to update it. This is not rocket science.
We're seeing jurisdictions like Portland, Oregon, among many others, take a hard look at some of their police specialty units. And in particular, I know the Detroit Police Department's drug unit has long been dogged by allegations of corruption, including stories of officers planting evidence, lying to prosecutors, robbing dealers, and embezzling funds that are meant to pay informants. And again, acknowledging the professional relationship that we discussed earlier between prosecutors and police, what's your position on how cultures, problems like this should be dealt with?
They should be dealt with swiftly and transparently. This should not be something that happens behind closed doors. We already have a trust problem with our local leaders. We have a trust problem within the Black community and law enforcement across the country. That's why you see people, rising up and marching and demanding change and saying enough is enough is enough. And so if you know that, if you really are in tune with people that you purport to represent, that you say you represent, then that means that you can do nothing in the dark. That means that you have to be very open and transparent with everything you're doing, especially with how you are handling untruthful officers. Jay, I got to tell you, there's a saying that says democracy dies in the dark. And that's what's been happening in Wayne County for a very long time. And when people ask questions, they're giving very surface level answers. And if you dig just beneath the surface, you'll find that those answers are not credible. They're not genuine. They're not truthful. And so the only way to get around that is to, one, replace the gatekeeper, and two, demand transparency from that person that says that they are in office to serve you. And that means that they should be publishing data, reports, statistics on how they are handling police misconduct. That is something that if you look at any poll across the country and locally here in Wayne County, it is one of the top 3 issues. We don't want to hear about what was done 30 years ago when someone was a line prosecutor and was handed the case to prosecute the killer's malice green. We want to talk about what is happening right now. We want to talk about why officers are not being held accountable when they choose not to turn on their body-worn cameras, that it's in Detroit, a policy by the department. We want to know why Brady List hasn't been published. Don't deflect. Don't go back to what has happened 30 years ago. Talk about right now. Talk about moving forward. Talk about why the ACLU published a questionnaire for both candidates for Wayne County prosecutor. And one of us has said that they are not pledging to create an independent body to investigate police misconduct. The prosecutor is very satisfied with the internal process that she has in her office, someone who not only works for her, but works closely with police officers. Well, the people have said that that is sufficient. So who are you to say that it is? Again, we have to get back to service, answering to the people that we represent. It's not about you. It's not about what you think is best. It's not about, in your mind, you doing something better than neighboring counties. We're talking about your county and what your county has said that they want. They want independent oversight because the trust in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office is just simply not there.
Given the current allegations and status of the drug unit in the Detroit Police Department, if you were elected, would you feel comfortable calling officers from that unit to testify?
Absolutely. You got to remember, Jay, as a criminal defense attorney, I am very comfortable and I have a lot of experience cross-examining officers on the witness stand. So that's not something that I would be afraid to continue. I believe that all people should be held accountable, including myself. If that means that I am put on the stand to answer questions, even if it's uncomfortable, I'll do what I have to do. It's a part of the job. You don't get to hide behind the curtain and hide behind very surface level words and deflect. That's not accountability, and that's not a public servant.
Pivoting a little bit across the country, we've seen COVID-19 highlighting a multitude of policy failings at the local, state, and federal level with respect to the criminal legal system. Wondering what specific criminal justice policy failings do you see have exposed that COVID-19 has exposed in Wayne County? And what will you do to change those practices in the prosecutor's office if you were elected?
Jay, I worked alongside several dedicated, unrelenting criminal defense attorneys from several organizations: the Wayne County Criminal Defense Bar Association, the Justice Center, Neighborhood Defender Services of Detroit. We worked with grassroots group, Michigan Liberation, several people that rolled up their sleeves and put in the work to shrink our jail population. Now, you will hear that at the same time, there was an effort to shrink the jail population by our chief judge and our county prosecutor and some other attorneys who were representing people housed at the Wayne County Jail. And those conversations were happening. And also at the same time, because not everyone was being considered for administrative release, which that's the reason why those conversations were being had, so that people could be released administratively who were considered vulnerable according to the CDC standards. There are a lot of people who didn't meet that criteria and were left to sit and rot in county jail unless defense attorneys acted quickly. And that's what we did. We banded together. We combed through the jail records to determine who was in jail. And then we divvied up work. We just, on a volunteer basis, were passing out 2 to 3 cases per attorney, cases that we didn't know the client, we didn't know the attorney that was assigned the case originally, and we didn't seek any compensation. This is what we do as attorneys. This is what we have decided to take up. And, you know, it was a job that we didn't think about. Get together, find out who's in the jail, draft motions for emergency bond reduction. And those motions were opposed by the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. We had to appear via Zoom in order to have hearings and argue for their release. And let me tell you, Jay, I think you should go back on YouTube and see some of these hearings, because they were supposed to be accessible to the public and later allowed to be viewed. When you look at the arguments that were proffered by the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office on the record in court as to why so much shouldn't be released, the argument started with, well, we don't know and have any proof that COVID-19 is in jails. We only know that it's at Detroit Detention Center. Okay. Then it became known that we had cases, positive cases in the jail, and even folks who were working there who died from the virus. So then the conversation shifted to, well, it's already in the jail, so aren't they safer in the jail and out? Why we need to let them out? Okay. And thankfully, judges were there to save us and save our clients, and they were able to recognize that despite the prosecutors, advocating for people to remain in jail during these proceedings, that it was not in their best interest or their families or societies for them to stay there. County jails are evolving populations. It's a transient population. They go through a revolving door. You could be there for one day, you could be there for 1 week, you could be there for 1 month. And then the jail staff, they go in every single day. And the Wayne County jail staff and the Detroit Police Department, they were hit very hard with this virus. We felt terrible for them. No one should have had to have dealt with this. And we could have avoided this had we had leadership who acted quickly and did not sit and say, well, I have to find every reason to oppose release. I only want to be part of administrative release conversations. And I need to have proof that they have a medical vulnerability. The proof of the medical vulnerability is that they're sitting in a cage where they don't have access to clean water, soap, sanitizer, and they don't have the ability to social distance, right? Like, even if they took out a lot of the activities to stop programming, which they did, I was told by folks who were in that county jail that they had to still eat in close quarters with people. They stopped hot meals, but they kept them eating cold meals together. What sense did that make? And if you know that, again, if you're in touch with the people who are directly and most impacted, then that triggers something within your soul for you to act quickly. That is your duty, and you don't think twice about it. And what that's taught us is that while we have shrank the jail population to the lowest it's ever been, we have not seen an increase in crime. So what does that tell you, Jay? That we had no business incarcerating that many people to begin with, because that did not go to public safety. I traveled with the the Michigan Jails Task Force for several months to most of their meetings across the state. And I can tell you that 87% of the people that are released on personal bonds, they reappear in court. 89% released on personal bonds do not reoffend. So that means that we don't need cash bail and hold people in the county jail while they're innocent, having not been proven guilty or pled guilty for any reason other than we like keeping people in jail until they can afford to buy their freedom.
I want to ask about exonerations, which has been a major issue in Michigan and in Wayne County in particular. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, Michigan ranks 5th in the nation for wrongful convictions that have been overturned, behind Texas, New York, Illinois, and California. And between 1989 and 2016, there were 31 people who were exonerated in Wayne County. That's more than anywhere else in the state. If you were elected prosecutor, what would you do to expand the office's conviction review unit? And what policy changes will you make to address the prevalence of wrongful convictions that we've seen in Wayne County?
So the first thing that I want to do is to shut down some of the units in the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office to allow for funding to be reallocated to the Conviction Integrity Unit. Valerie Newman is the head of that unit. She is a phenomenal attorney. I know her very well, and personally and professionally. And I can tell you that if she had more help and was the only full-time attorney in that unit, she could work magic. If she did not have to get authorization and clearance to bring folks home and was just left to do her thing, she could bring home more than 20 people in 2.5 years. But we need a progressive gatekeeper who will allow folks to do the jobs that they have been hired to do. And it's not that you just focus on the back end. Wayne County has more wrongful convictions than all other counties combined. It has to start with how you bring people into the system. And it has to start with the analysis of you prosecuted an innocent person, you authorized a warrant without insufficient evidence. The evidence that you had at the time that their conviction was overturned, when you review the records, it was not technically new evidence. It was just evidence that you chose not to consider, that you chose to ignore, that you chose to bury. But the record is very clear on a lot of these cases. And if you do the math and say, okay, taxpayer dollars prosecuted an innocent person the first time, then we spend taxpayer dollars a second time fighting their release through the appellate process. And then we spend money a third time through the conviction integrity unit to secure the release and overturn their conviction. The question becomes, why are we doing that? Why aren't we answering for our role on the front end instead of trying to simply receive credit for what we're doing on the back end? If you want to save money, don't bring people unnecessarily into this system. And then you can have the funding to have a second, a third, a fourth Valerie Newman and expand that conviction integrity unit and start to chip away at more the thousand of cases. I think it's over 1,000 cases that are currently pending for review by that unit. They can't get to those any quicker than they are because they don't have the manpower. They don't have the manpower because they're spending the dollars fighting those innocent people and prosecuting them to begin with.
Sorry, foiled by the mute button again.
I'm sorry, Jay. I'm getting a lot of comments that my mic is still hard for me to hear. Is there anything that we can do about that? I have an actual mic plugged into my computer. And I've taken it in and out, and it seems that it is still the same. I don't know what to do.
If you want to try plugging it in and out, we welcome that experimentation. See if we can find a solution.
Okay.
All right, let's give it a shot. I only have a couple more questions for you. I appreciate your time. I want to talk about the way that the prosecutor's office has been treating children and juveniles. So Michigan has more juvenile life sentences than anywhere else in the country. And in 2018, of the approximately 2,000 people who are still serving juvenile life without parole sentences in the country, 350 of those are in Michigan. And we see this harsh treatment of young people not being limited to sentencing. I believe it was last year there was a case that involved a 10-year-old boy who was charged with aggravated assault during a dodgeball game. The case received national coverage and it was eventually dropped, but many commentators had referred to it as an example of aggressive charging. Wondering just generally, do you feel that cases involving juveniles accused of crimes should be treated the same as adults? And if not, what distinctions do you see? What distinctions would you make if you were elected?
No, I do not think that we should be charging our children, our babies, as if they are responsible adults and can fully appreciate their actions. Science has taught us that the human brain is not fully developed until about the age of 24, 25. If you add trauma on top of that, many of our young people are dealing with trauma because of the underlying issues of poverty, lack of access to resources, mental health issues that are undiagnosed and untreated, substance abuse. If you add those layers of trauma onto that, the age rises to 26, 27 sometimes. So because we know that, we have to act as if we know it, and we can no longer continue to ignore it. The case last year with that beautiful Black baby, Bryce Lindley, he will forever be traumatized by that incident. I met him. I met his mother. When that child met me and I told him who I was and what I was doing to run to be his next Wayne County prosecutor, he cried. He cried because he was relieved. He was relieved at the idea that what happened to him may not happen to another child involved in a schoolyard game of basketball. He told me that Miss Worthy has never apologized to me. She has the baby? He said, no. He said, and I'm on her Wikipedia page, and I look like a criminal when you Google her name. I'm a mother of a beautiful little Black boy named Langston. And it hurts me to think what could happen to my child if we continue to allow our leaders to treat our innocent children like guilty adults. This is a prime example of, yet again, rubber stamping warrants and authorizing charges, charging first and then investigating later. The prosecutor's office response was that the charges should never be brought. Well, darn it, don't bring them. How many times do we have to apologize and say we made a mistake before we institute policies to prevent the very mistake? These are very traumatic mistakes. How many more Devontae Sanfords, how many more Bryce Lindleys are we going to have before we again say enough is enough is enough? So no, I do not support the idea of criminalizing children. No, I do not support this idea that it is okay that we simply apologize on camera or not at all in this instance. I don't, again, believe that Devontae Sanford's family or Bryce Lindley's family have ever received an apology. And so at what point do we say, you know what, here's the policy that we are instituting. Here's a copy of it. I'm publishing it. I'm providing it to you, Kamisha Lindley, and I'm providing it to the public so that you know this will never happen again. It goes back to accountability and transparency.
Thank you, Victoria. I want to take a quick step back from some of the more specific policies we've been asking about, and I want to wrap this forum by asking you, sort of, we're at this point at a national level where people, media, elected officials are scrutinizing the roles of police and prosecutors and the entire criminal legal system, maybe more carefully than ever. How do you think that your candidacy fits in with this particular moment?
I think it's a heck of a time to be alive, Jay. I think that across the country, you have old, young, Black, white, everybody involved in this national uprising, demanding that Black Lives Matter, demanding that we stop police brutality and police misconduct, and that our gatekeepers hold bad apples accountable so that we don't create a rotten bunch. I was in Livonia speaking at a Black Lives Matter rally a few weeks ago, and there were over 1,200 folks, and most of them did not look like me, they looked like you, Jay. And when I got done delivering my speech, I came down from the podium, from the stage, and people had tears in their eyes. They said, this is our moment, that they felt this is their time to stand up and to take part in being change makers and changing this practice of blindly voting for someone because of name recognition, because they're part of the status quo. A lot of folks told me they didn't even really know what a prosecutor did until I explained it to them, right? Like one person said, I didn't even know we could vote on our own prosecutor. Oh, baby, didn't know that. And so, folks were hugging me, they were thanking me for running. They said they've been having conversations with folks and their families, and I know that to be true because I called. I have to do call time every day as a candidate. Like I'm glued to a phone and I'm constantly raising money. And I called someone last week, and she started squealing slightly, and she's like, "I can't believe you're on my phone." And I'm like, yeah. And she says, my kids were just telling me about you. They told me that they saw you speak at a rally and that they wanted me to go to their website and learn more about you because I was ready to vote for your opponent. But after hearing my kids talk about you and I watched one of your speeches and I read your platform, you are the change that we have been waiting for. And I was just so moved by her words because that tells me that my message is resonating. I know my message is resonating because my opponent has it plastered on her website as if it's our own. So, the message is working. The people are hungry for it. It's the right time. More and more people are connecting the dots and saying that, this is a criminal injustice system, and it is a system that is founded on racism. It's a system that has continued slavery, from slavery to Jim Crow, now through mass incarceration, and people want to have a part in changing that. And they are connecting the dots and saying, yeah, we are feeling the energy, we are marching, we have our demands. And one of our demands is that people go to the polls on August 4th and they exercise their right to vote, something that my ancestors marched and fought for and died for. And they're saying we're going to continue that. And we're going to make sure that we do all that we can to bring change to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And for that, I'm beyond grateful. I so am.
Thank you, Victoria. This actually concludes our prosecutors forum for the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And as Victoria mentioned, a reminder to folks watching out there, primary election day is this upcoming, not this upcoming Tuesday, but Tuesday, August 4th. And if you're voting by mail, the rules are that your ballot must be received, not postmarked, but received by 8 p.m. on election day. So be sure you get in a little early. Thank you again to Victoria and for all our viewers who joined us today. Have a good